God wants you to do?
10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments. Okay. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Do you like that one? You tend to follow that one?
Yes, I do.
This is getting like, what's that show in the morning where they throw chairs at each other? Jerry. So you like that one?
Well, I'm sure my husband likes it more than I follow it. But yeah.
Then you?
I'm sure he likes that I follow it more than.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, here's the problem with that. And I took thou shalt not commit adultery on purpose. True story. World War II. You've got a German soldier, his wife and their 2 children. German soldier is off, is captured by the British in a British prisoner of war camp. Mom and the 2 kids, German, are on their own. They're getting towards the end of the war short on food. So they go foraging for food. While they're foraging, the incoming Soviet army comes up and finds them and arrests them. The children are released to relatives. The wife is accused of being a spy, which she was not. This is a German wife. Carried back to the Soviet Union and placed in prison. War ends. The British let the father free. He's freed us from being a prisoner of war. Comes back to Germany. Reunited with his kids. Mom's still over in Russia. The Russians have a rule. The rule is the only way you get out of prison from a life sentence of theoretical spying, one of the ways is you become a burden to the state. A woman could become a burden to the state by becoming pregnant because they don't want to deal with it. And in which case, generally, they will release her. So what does she do, the mother? She allows herself to be impregnated by a German guard. She is then released and returned to her family. Torah says you shouldn't commit adultery. Did she commit adultery? Yes. Hmm?
Situational methods.
True story. She didn't?
Well, it's kind of the same.
You see the problem when we say, I'm not picking on you.
No, it's the same thing as like the military or a police officer because sometimes you have to kill and the Bible says not to murder. So.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So if we say, you know, the commandments, 10 commandments tell us what to do, and that's how we know what God wants us to do. Except that breaks down, doesn't it? Some people hear God talking to them, and they hear them say that they should mount a holy war against people who don't agree religiously with what they believe in and kill them. This revelation, guys, is a tricky thing. Everybody see where I'm going here? Because you can't know what it is that God wants you to do without some kind of a filter between you and God, and you use that filter to interpret it. I will always remember growing up, my mom, because this was in the 50s, my mom wore a girdle, and women in those days wore girdles. And I would watch her every morning put her girdle on. And she would take one leg, she'd put it in, then she would hold on against the wall, put the other one in, and she would do that, and then there was some of this. And once she was totally fitted in this girdle, she would go, you know, to make sure everything was. So was she in the girdle or was she not in the girdle? You see, when you have a girdle, whether it's underwear or a belief system, if everything doesn't quite fit, you got to stuff it in and it doesn't quite make connections, you got problems. And that's precisely what we have when we talk about Revelation. So, that being the case, what I've done here is I've created, based on last week's diagram of prayer of God, the same diagram up here with regard to revelation. Now, in the classical view, God speaks to us. Problem is, no one hears God today, and those who do are labeled abnormal. B, even if God spoke to people in the Bible, a human being like Moses still had to interpret what he heard from God and tell the people. So there's still a human interpretation. Now, those who believe that God is a power or a force, God gives an intellect to man and a conscience. God reveals himself when man exercises his intellect and his conscience. And man initiates this. What does God want me to do? Is this the right? Should I go ahead and allow myself to be impregnated so that I can be reunited with my family? Am I breaking the law? But is this you talking to yourself? Or is this something you actually are receiving as a message from God? And how do you know? Problem. How do you know man isn't talking to himself when he's asking God for help? The one in the middle is, again, the existential. And the existentialist, and this is certainly true in Jewish law, let's look at it this way. On one side, you've got the firecracker, which is the Bible, the classical, God's words. In the Torah, it says, recorded list of how the Jewish people understood what God wanted. God is therefore present. God is captured in God's essence in the written word of the Bible because he was part of the men who wrote down the biblical words. It's the given, it's the tradition. On the other side of this equation, we got the match. Human beings and our autonomy, our feelings. We were created with intelligence to reason and conscience to feel. And we walk around with our own baggage. I once had a congregant in Mississippi who came to me, just to give you an idea, and he was having a problem in his marriage. What was the problem? As he put it, with his wife, if it doesn't quack, she doesn't pay attention. What he meant by that was she was an avid duck hunter. And if it didn't quack, she wasn't interested. So she was spending all her life at the duck camps and not at home with him. Well, here, her life was one of ducks and quacking and shotguns. Each of us carries who we are. Those are those glasses that I started with our particular lenses and the lenses of our experience. And what happens is that when we, with our autonomous, individual, personal experience lives, read what the tradition says 3,500, 4,000 years ago, something happens in that reading, in that moment, and somewhere in that tension between the two. The hope is, says the existentialist, that for you get a sense of what it is God wants you to do. So what you sense God wants you to do, what you sense, may be totally different. But they can't be immoral because on this farther side of the tradition, those the boundaries are set by the laws of the tradition that one reads in the Torah. So you can't, even if in your heart of hearts you want to go and do something evil to somebody, as you read Torah and it says you don't do that, you have that limitation on you. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's kind of having flexibility within some precepts. And I think all of us, once again, and I said it last week, you'll be working on a problem, you're just not sure what to do, and then suddenly it'll dawn on you. Well, I think you and God have been putting match to firecracker, and one day, boom, and you got it. How many of you, for example, have ever worked out a problem in a dream at night in your sleep? This is the most incredible thing that I've ever, I kept having this recurrent dream after my dad died, and my mom wouldn't let him into my life anymore, that he had somehow become evil. And this went on in recurrent dreams for 16, 17 years. And one day I finally woke up and I said, holy cow, this is me trying to work through my dad's absence from my life in death. And the fact that my parents happened to fight a lot. and I wrapped it all together. The minute I made all that connection and figured out why I had the recurrent dream, stopped happening. So what goes on an existential level, different from what we were aware of in total consciousness, is very real. And I think that in many ways this existentialist explanation is the way that God talks to us. So we don't hear all the same thing because our experiences are different, but we don't go beyond certain parameters in what we hear God tell us to do because of tradition. This is the evolution and development of Jewish law. This is a fabulous chart. The first thing you have, all law for Judaism starts in Torah. And it's called, you can read this, Torah Shebichtav, the written law. According to tradition, Torah was given to Moses on Sinai. He transmitted it to Joshua, transmitted it to the elders, he transmitted it to the prophets, and eventually given to the rabbis and the Sanhedrin. And I can tell you, without going deeply into this, that we're pretty sure now today, as a result of textual analysis and other things, that the Bible was written in sections by different author groups, and different parts of the Bible were placed together by editors. In fact, I'll give you a very quick example. How long did the flood, Noah's flood, reign on earth? 40 days and 40 nights, it says. The other is 7 days and 7 nights. There are also two stories of creation. Huh? Well, that's creation, but there are two creation stories in the Bible right next to each other. There are two Noah stories next to each other. That's why one says 7 days and 7 nights, and that's why the other says 40 days and 40 nights. But we've gotten so used to reading them all together that we can't tell that they're two different ones unless we're looking for it. How does it happen? You had two different schools of authors, and each had his or her own particular sacred version. And when they brought it to the editor as an oral story, the editor wrote it down and he said, well, I can't say this one's right and that one's wrong, that's wrong, let's put them both together. And people in that day understood that. In our day, we lost track of it. And as a result, we can tell again through textual analysis, we can tell that it was put together in pieces. It's also been edited. Certain things have been edited out. Certain things have been edited in. For example, you remember from the book of Ecclesiastes, a wonderful song came from. And it says, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, right? To everything, turn, okay? The whole point of the writer of Ecclesiastes was exactly that. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. There's no variety, there's no change, there's nothing interesting. He goes on to say, all the rivers run into the sea and the seas never stop flowing. There is nothing new under the sun, he says. Everything in life is boring, it's dull, and it's totally useless because you're born, you live, and you die. He therefore then goes on to say, so eat, drink, and be merry before you die. Just have a hell of a good time because there's nothing to any of it. It's really pessimistic. The only thing is editors got in here, and they knew it was pessimistic. And they decided they didn't like the way it was written, and they juiced it up. They took it from, to everything there's a season and time for every purpose to heaven, to a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to sow, a time to read, get it? By the time they were doing it, they put enough fluff in there that you lose the sense that it's pessimistic. And they did it by addition, by edit. So, and that goes on all through the Bible. There are places in the historical section in the Bible where it says, and the crown was passed. The crown of Judaism was passed to the king and his name, the Jewish king, and to the priest. And 4 verses later it talks